Today, we will do more talk about super breaker blocks. With the last two videos, you'll master trading breaker blocks and how to identify key levels with price action structures. I will walk through step-by-step guidance, ICT-based breaker blocks and order blocks. We have so much to do. If you're ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course, all about price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. With this video, I'll cover the basics of New York opening trades. If you are looking for a structured table of contents, I set it up for you. You can find it on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. Let's talk about bullish super breaker blocks and the trade that I took this weekend. Again, every key point of breaker blocks starts with an extremely significant liquidity hunt, like major swing moves or the previous day's lows and highs. Most people think it is enough, but for me it is not. I always have a secondary confirmation, like a big imbalance, order block, other breaker blocks to support the reaction. Let's start with a top-down analysis of my last trade. As you remember this weekly chart, the price at the moment reacting to this weekly imbalance and the order block. When we switch to the one-day chart, you can see that the order block pushed the price down, but down to where? Obviously, this major daily imbalance. Remember, price always seeks to fill imbalances and hunt the liquidity. Then the price always reacts to imbalances or hunted liquidity as well. So, what is happening here? Notice the inducement right here. Price hunts the liquidity and makes a swing failure pattern. And it is majorly filling this nice big daily imbalance. What a perfect reaction point. Why the swing point is important? Because it creates the most important high in this chart. I call them significant high and low. We already discussed high quality breaks last week, no need to deep dive again. To put everything in simple words, I look for strong reactions to significant highs and lows. I'm looking for a reason, a momentary reversal. Okay, let's zoom into this reaction point. I'll be focusing on lower time frames like 30 minutes. Now, as you can see, daily imbalance mostly filled and significant low hunted. How does the price react here? Tell me where the market structure breaks. If you see the MSB, please type MSB in the comment section. Yes, this is our structure shift right here, and this is the displacement, the high quality break. Check these big body green candlesticks. A little confluence for you. Where is the price reaction? 26K. A major price level. A round number. Let's talk about bullish breaker blocks. Most of the time we only use the last green candlestick before the fall. We already know this. Our first touch, the first possible reaction point. What if we have 4 candlesticks like this? Where is the full breaker block? Can you tell me this? Yes, the same colored candlesticks that stick together will be your true full breaker block. So, in our chart, these multiple green candlesticks are our breaker block zone, our full BB zone. First touch points most of the time are flip points, basically the support and resistance flip. We already know about premium and discount arrays. Most of the time we always want to long the price from discount or at least EQ level. But what if we can't? Let's go back to my trade. When we drove the premium and discount zones to our chart, as you can see, price never pulls down. Where is the best point of interest in this chart? Notice this order block at this point which also collides with the imbalance. Plus, it is in the discount zone. In my opinion, this was the best POE in this chart. But how did I trade this? Price never pulled back. We will talk about that later. Let's continue to understand super breaker blocks, the supplements. As you know from the last video, a single breaker block is not enough. Not super at all if it is alone. The super word comes from multiple structure collisions. Think about Superman. He can fly, he can shoot lasers from his eyes, he has the super strength. He is the full package of super. When you look at my chart, you can notice this giant imbalance right inside the breaker block. One of the best confirmations for me. Let's move on and find other little confluences. As you know, I love the price when it is filled up, powered up before the big move, the inducement. It is a very important sign of big price moves. When you look at this chart, you'll notice this great micro uptrend line. But these trend lines are everywhere. Which one to use? We mostly focus on the ones that are around the key structures. Why is this trend line forming right above the breaker block, largest imbalance, and support and resistance flip? Is it coded? Is it algorithmic? Keep it secret for now. As you know, we compared high and low time frame entries last week. We talked about the advantages and the disadvantages. Using high time frame entries will basically save time for you, and it will be less complex. The big downside is the profit will be limited. Let's get back to the chart. First, let's talk about where this price can move to. Do we have any clear targets to aim for? Notice these equal highs, significant and clear. There are also imbalances above as possible targets that we can use for runners. Okay, remember my best point of interest, the premium and discount EQ with the order block? I placed a limit order right above it. In my opinion, this was still the best entry point in this chart. Nothing will change my opinion. I also used manual entry for this quick trade right at this point. But why? Price tapped the breaker block. The first touch. Significant flip point. Price tapped the major imbalance after the internal inducement with hunt. So many reasons to enter. So, my idea was simple. 2 trades. If one fails, I will use the other one. If I end up with 1 loss and 1 win, I'm still the best trader in the world in terms of statistics. Let's move on to the low time frame entry models. I want to repeat it 100 times. Combining high and low time frames is still the best method of trading with much higher win rate probabilities. But the problem, it could be quite time consuming. I'm a busy person, so I balance my life between high and low time frame entries. Okay, let me zoom in on this area and open the 5-minute charts. Can we use a sniper trading low time frame entry model? Let's discuss it. Price tapped imbalance, breaker block, and the flip point, and reacted well. You can see the micro MSB here. Where is my full breaker block? These 3 candlesticks and this imbalance in sight. Notice how the price pulls back. Then what happens is the price makes another micro MSB. This time reaction is very powerful. Notice this candlestick. It creates a micro super order block. Then the price flies away from it. A bit complex, right? Well, not for me. I love complex things as a software engineer. My problem is time. You need to have a lot of time on your hands to catch these perfect snipers. Okay folks, I hope you gained some knowledge about how to read the markets and identify the key zones before trading. If you have any questions in your mind, please leave a comment below. I'm happy to answer them. If you liked the video, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for me. Thank you, take care and see you soon.